When the program started and we had the evidence that Graham talked about, Queensland construction industry didn't know what to do. They just knew they had to do something. So they said to Jorgen, well, here's a heap of money. You're going to have to do something with this report. I don't care what it is, just make it the world's best practice. So Jorgen looked around the world and said, God, where do I go? And the organisation we came across that seemed to be appropriate for the space that we're in construction, that came from a community development model, was an organisation based in Canada called Living Works. And a number of people here have had some association. But if you've done Safe Talk training as part of Connector training, or you've done Assist, they're Living Works programs, and they're doing a remarkable job. And once again, it's been a gift to us to have Heather Stokes from the US, who's from Living Works, to be here to address us this morning. Heather's a delightful lady, and as a staff, we're really big on quality. So we had Heather work with us yesterday to make certain that all our guys are true north, that we're not off doing our own little agenda bits to the side, that we are straight down the line. And Heather came to help readjust us and to re-enthuse us and whatever. She comes from a great experience around suicide prevention, around strategic planning. I was delighted to hear she's also done work in Africa. She's passionate about animals. And the New South Wales Mick organised a seal to accompany us on around the harbour. So thank you, New South Wales Mick. So can we give Heather a really warm welcome?
Thank you, John. They told me that if I really closed my eyes and thought hard enough on the cruise that I might see a kangaroo walking on water. I haven't seen that yet, but if anyone knows where I can go to see that, let me know. This is my first time to Australia, so thank you for such a warm welcome, and thank you, John and Jorgen, for inviting me. It's been such a pleasure. You've been really wonderful hosts, and getting to work with the Safe Talk trainers and Assist trainers yesterday, John just said that I redirected them, but I really didn't. I think that they are really committed to what they're doing, and they're really grounded because Jorgen and John have created such a foundation for them. And they were really thoughtful and insightful, and through the discussion, they really redirected themselves. So I appreciate the credit, but the credit really goes to the 30 of the folks that were in the training yesterday. And Jorgen and John asked me to bring an international perspective. And so it's been really wonderful to hear both Kevin Hines and Kevin Briggs talking about his son. And that creates some emotional reactions inside of us. I've heard their stories, and I still I feel emotional and heavy after hearing that. And I think, I'm lucky that I've had the training and I'm surrounded by colleagues that we know how to reach out and we know what to do. But then I wonder about how all of you felt. And really what Jorgen and John said is, can I talk about how suicide is everyone's business? And you can make a difference. Each one of us in here can make a difference. Regardless of whether we've had training, we have empathy and we're here. And so as opposed to what Annette said in terms of we need to get training mandated, how about us saying that we want the training and being okay to talk about suicide? So that's, if you leave with anything, I hope that you remember that each one of you can make a difference, and that each one of you, if you care, you can learn the skills to help. You've heard a lot from Dr. Martin and Annette, and you'll hear more about how mates in construction is really the gold standard. And I'll talk about a bit of that. But the theme of the conference really is mental health at work. Do we care? And I care, and I'm assuming that you're here because you care. And so I want to just say thank you for caring. I haven't tested this yet, but it works. One of our themes at Living Works is suicide safer communities. And we've heard a lot, and I think we all hear a lot about how pervasive the problem is. But what if we just imagined what a suicide-safer community would look like? And it just takes one of us, and I think there are about 200 people here in the room. And so if each one of us collectively reached out to somebody in this room, we could save 200 lives. And that's a powerful number. Dr. Martin was talking about 15 lives saved. I think that was the number he said. Imagine if we could save 200. I mean, that would be really, really powerful. Imagine being able to spot invitations. We at Living Works call them invitations as opposed to signs of suicide, because we believe that when someone's suffering, they invite us by sharing something. They might look at us a certain way, they might indicate that they've had a bad day. That's an invitation to connect. John's been talking a lot about encouraging each of us to connect with each other. And really what it takes is looking someone in the eye and just saying, "Hi, how was your day?" And caring about that. Not doing that as you're walking really fast to another meeting or checking a text, but really connecting with someone and just saying, "How are you doing today?" And especially after a morning like this, we might all have different thoughts that came up, or it might trigger certain memories, and it's important to check in with either the connectors that they've pointed out or even with whomever you're sitting next to. So how does that compare or relate to what I'm talking about today? And I thought, how can I talk about a world perspective? This is my first time to Australia, right? So I look to learn from each of you. And my role at Living Works, I do strategic development. But what does that mean? For me, that means looking around the world and getting to know what's happening, really understanding the similarities and differences about who we are as humans and what efforts we're trying to do in suicide prevention. And I think oftentimes we look at all of our differences. Well, how do we adapt this because it's different? How do we relate here because it's different? And yes, there are differences, and it's really important to understand what those differences are. It's also really important to understand what the similarities are and what connects us as humans and caring individuals. And so in my role, I feel really honored and fortunate that I get to learn about all different cultures and how they're similar and how they relate and share those lessons learned. I had a meeting yesterday where some folks were talking about working in the Aboriginal communities here in Australia and in New Zealand. And there are so many Aboriginal communities all around the world trying to address suicide. And there are things that are working and there are challenges that are happening. And how can I be a connector at kind of a 10,000 foot level and connect them so that they can learn from what is successful and how they can overcome their barriers? The international connectedness, I think, is a lot more possible these days because of technology. But it's also really easy to think that we're connecting with people without really connecting. And I think that it's just really important, as Dr. Martin was saying, not to label, but to really see someone as a person and that they may just be having a tough day. And I think that all of us experience tough days and have different coping skills for that. And it's important to remember that we are all human and that we experience things differently. And so some of us might feel really empowered by this morning, and some of us might feel a bit traumatized by this morning. And I think to respect the differences of our experiences and hear those stories and appreciate those stories and being able to connect with people in sharing of those stories. We're all impacted by them, whether you've had lived experience, whether you know someone that has, or whether you know someone that knows someone, or whether you're connected to folks here in Mates and Construction, that means you're impacted. You're hearing the stories whether or not you've actually experienced it yourself. And that connects us today here in this room, and I think that's really powerful because we're from all over the world, all over Australia. We have several folks here from the US, including myself, and Ireland and New Zealand. And I think it's important to appreciate what John and Jorgen have pulled together in this room and have connected us in a way that we might not have been able to do ourselves. And so being able to really take the time to appreciate who we're around today. And John's done a wonderful job encouraging us to do that. The other thing is remembering that oftentimes we think of mental health workers as the sole source for being able to respond to someone who's at risk of suicide. And they are absolutely important. But as we've also heard, there are many other roles and ways in which we can reach out and support each other. So just to take a step back in terms of the world perspective, I didn't know if this would be covered or not, and it hasn't been, but in the World Health Organization report, 800,000 people a year die by suicide. That is a staggering, staggering number. That means every 40 seconds, one person dies by suicide. And for every person that dies by suicide, it's estimated that 20 others might attempt. That's 16 million people. I don't even know how to picture 16 million people. And then on average, every death by suicide leaves 6 to 20 what we call lost survivors, people impacted by that death. Could be family, could be peers, could be colleagues. I believe it's even higher than that, and especially in rural communities where you're so incredibly connected. And then I did the math, and math is not my thing. I'm not a statistician. 4.8 million survivors, lost survivors. That's a lot. What's being done about that? And there's a lot actually being done about that. We heard about the Mates in Construction model. I'll also talk a little bit about the Mates in Construction model. Dr. Martin talked about national strategies. The World Health Organization, for the first time just last year, released a global report on suicide prevention, making it a priority. Dr. Martin might be able to correct this, but I read in that health organization report that there are 28 countries that have national strategies. And how great that we have someone in the room who can say that national strategies work and that they make a difference. And so sometimes I think, okay, that's global. What do we do with that? How can we then bring it to our organization or to our community? And here are some key elements that are talked about in or incorporated in different national strategies. And I thought it was important to just pull it out, not put in a lot of data, but talk about how each of you in your own organizations can make this real, doing a multi-sector approach. I'll use in the construction industry, doesn't mean that you just stay within the construction industry. Look at the diverse group of people in this room that they've brought together. We're from all sorts of fields. I'm a social worker, there are researchers, academics, psychologists, working professionals in all sorts of fields here. And we're coming together to address this issue. It's important to bring in many disciplines into working together to prevent suicide, because we're not just in our workplace. We have our own lives. We're parents, we're siblings, we're friends. Also, the understanding of what the cultural and social implications might be. It could be in a country, it could be within your own organization, your own community. It's important to understand what those are and to get those different perspectives, because one person may have one perspective, but if you have a table of 5 or 6 people, you might get 5 or 6 different perspectives. Dr. Martin really talked about how important having and establishing best practices is. How do you know if what you're doing is working unless either you're using a model that's been researched and the outcome states so, or if you're trying something new, make sure that you implement a data collection process so that you can determine whether or not it's working. And then if it is, great, what's working? And then what are some of the gaps and what are some of the things that you can do better? Prevention strategies, of course, training. Crisis intervention, very important. That's what ASSIST trains. It really trains someone to be able to identify someone at risk and do the intervention. How do you decrease that imminent risk right there and then? Postvention, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that, but that means really talking with the community after there has been a suicide and what needs to happen in terms of addressing the grief and addressing what's happened and being open and honest about how that impacts the rest of the community. So there are 25 flags up here. Living Works is in 25 different regions. We have a history of 30 years, and our development process is very thoughtful, some of you are familiar with us, many of you may not be, in terms of the methodical, thoughtful, research planful way in which we develop our training programs. And all of our trainers, we have 6,617 ASSIST trainers around the world, and we have 2,516 Safe Talk trainers. And Safe Talk's a bit of a newer program. ASSIST has been around for 30 years. Safe Talk's been around for about 10 years. And we read every single trainer report form that comes back in because we care about supporting our trainers, and we care about what's happening, and we care about what the feedback is so that we can continue to make our programs better. Part of what I look at, and I mentioned this before, are the common threads that come in through there. And really, one of the things that I've been doing is really encouraging other workplace initiatives, other construction industries. It's phenomenal that Dr. Martin and Jorgen have published a paper that we can then promote and say, look, this is what's working. Talk with them, find out how they did that. There's construction in every single country around the world, whether they're just a non-developed country, which non-developed countries are really looking at how to become developed, or developing countries. There's a workforce everywhere. It might not look the same, but it's important to be able to reach out and say, there are things that you can do too. Here's a foundation to look at for that. So how does that fit into who Living Works is in terms of our mission? And our essential mission is about saving lives, developing training, but it's not just about sending trainers out there. It's about really understanding the community's need. And oftentimes, when calls come to me or emails come to me, a community's in crisis, and there's been a suicide, or there's been some funding because there's been a suicide, or they've made a case that funding is really needed because the problem is so huge. And part of my role is to take a step back and to really look at what's happening in the community and what do you want to see happen. And it's really important. I think Dr. Martin mentioned that Mateson construction started slow, and that's essential. It's essential to start slow and be thoughtful about what you're doing. Take the time to think, because if you're going to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars, you want to make sure that that's sustainable. And oftentimes we see that when there's crisis mode, there isn't that thoughtful plan of how to make this sustainable. And so in my role, I really do encourage that. And it could take 6 months to a year to try and figure that out. But in the long run, more lives are saved. I touched on this a few moments ago in terms of we're all community members. And I think that I've been at Living Works for 4.5 years. I've been in the field for 20 years, and I came across Living Works about 10 years ago when I was at the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline in the States. And when I came across, I was delegated the responsibility to look at training programs really more nationally across the United States, and I was interested in what was happening internationally as well. And so I went to every single training that I knew of or that was shared with me, and I put together a committee to look at all of the trainings. And I was really blown away by how many different demographics were able to use the Assist and Safe Talk training. And I think that what's important to remember is that these models have been evaluated time and time again. And what we call invisible adaptations are really important to incorporate in that so that it speaks to your audience. And so in our conversation yesterday and in the training, well, there was the thing about self-care. And I'll use Jorgen's example because he said, Heather, I need to put you on the spot. And this was yesterday. And he said, we need to expand the self-care because blokes in the construction industry, they don't even know what that means. And it's important that we allow for an understanding of if there's a community that doesn't understand what self-care is, doesn't have a word for suicide, that we spend some time to explore what that means and how do we integrate that into the program to make sure that that fits with your audience. And so, of course, you need to integrate self-care. That's so extremely important. And it wasn't about, we don't know what that means, so we need to remove it. But it was more about, how do we incorporate this and how do we teach this to people that don't really understand that concept? And so I really appreciated that opportunity in that room with 25 to 30 trainers so that they could hear and really explore, well, how do we do that? I don't know that we came up with an exact answer, but we're talking about it. And I think that to be really thoughtful about it and to spend the time to explore, you'll come up with the best answer. It's amazing to think that we're in various different military settings. It's amazing to think that we can be in construction industry, we can be in military, we can be working with athletes in hockey leagues or in the National Football League. It's different than football in England, and I don't know what football is here if you have football, but anything with a ball will work with you guys. First responders. We do work with law enforcement. We do work with firefighters, and if I hadn't seen it and I hadn't experienced it, I don't know that I would have believed it, but it's been really impressive to see that how many different demographics we can work with one training model, or several training models, but with it being core. We're making a dent. I think that we oftentimes think about kind of the bigger problem, and I think it's really important for us to think about what we're doing right and what's working and to share that as well. It would be really great if people felt that they could talk about suicide and that it wasn't a fear, that if it came up that they weren't fearing liability or they weren't fearing that they wouldn't know what to do, and that they knew that maybe they might not know what to do, but that they could go to someone else to find out what to do. And I think that in order not to be afraid of talking about suicide, when you're looking at developing a strategic plan for your organization or your community, it has to be based in core values. What do you believe? How do you operate? What does that mean in terms of your own interaction? And that, because suicide is complex and it's a difficult topic to talk about day in and day out. So it's important that you have something that grounds you together and shared values that can bring you back if you get a bit off track. And so these are Living Works core values. I invite you to borrow them if you don't have any. It needs to be your anchor. It needs to be your foundation in which you can go back to. In addition to that, it's important to have core beliefs about what suicide means. If you're going to develop a strategic plan to do suicide prevention, what do you believe about suicide? Do you agree with it? Do you disagree with it? There were certainly conversations that came up yesterday where we believed that every life is precious and every life deserves to be saved. But then we can be thrown a curveball where, what if that person's done something really horrible? That might challenge our core belief in terms of, does this person deserve to live? And so you be sure to be grounded in what your core beliefs are, and to remember that it can be prevented. Each situation is complex. It's not a label of depression or anxiety or a mental health issue, but sometimes day-to-day living can lead to thoughts of suicide. I'll just reiterate, you may be tired of hearing about this by now or by the end of the day, but relationships are key. It takes a relationship. You might not have a long relationship. You might think, oh, does relationship mean that I have to have known that person for a period of time? It doesn't. It could mean that, I think, John, you made us do an exercise of where we needed to smile next to the person that we were sitting next to this morning. That establishes eye contact, and that is the beginning of what could be a relationship. It's okay to check in. And then the talking really empowers the development of that relationship. The other piece that's really important, and Kevin Briggs talked about this a bit this morning, is that cooperating, collaborating, empowering the person that's at risk is really important. It's not necessarily, at least LivingWorks believes, and I believe, that it's not about pulling someone off of a bridge or out of that imminent risk. It's about collaborating and developing that relationship so that they feel empowered and that they feel cared about in order to step off themselves. The other thing is that if you have empathy and you care, skills can be learned. We wholeheartedly believe that, and we've seen it happen. I'll also just reiterate evaluation, evaluation, evaluation. Sometimes people think, what does that mean? How do we do that? That feels, I'm not an evaluator, and if I were to hear that 10 years ago, that would have felt really overwhelming. Sometimes what it means is collaborating with an organization that knows how to do that and talk with them about what do we need to evaluate? What outcomes are we looking for? You're not in this alone. It's important to really partner with other people that have the skills that you might not. I always tell myself and others that I don't have to have all the answers, but what's really important is that I know where to go and I know who to ask. Now, mates in construction. One of the things that David said last night was there were four-letter words. And I did do a lot of preparation for this talk, but I am going to use all of the conversations and relationships that I've developed over the last couple of days. And the 4 words, the first one was care. And I think, you know, for someone who runs a huge construction industry that's about building and concrete and tangible, and we don't necessarily, or I didn't, in terms of the construction industry, think about that's an industry that would really care about people. I think of it more in terms of the building blocks, and the building blocks are there in relationships, and it's really important to care. And the middle two go together, hard work. Hard work makes it look easy. It's not easy to talk with someone who's at risk. It's important to work hard. It's important to challenge yourself to do things that might be a bit out of your comfort zone, but to do it when you know that you have support and that you have the skills or the resources to be able to do it. You know, I think about other analogies in the construction industry is that you're not going to put, well, I shouldn't say that. I was going to say you're not going to put a nail in concrete, but maybe you do. I wouldn't think of that. I would think that you'd put a nail in wood and maybe screws in concrete. But I don't know. I would ask you guys because I don't know about that. But it's hard work. And you have to learn that, and you have to learn what tools go with what kinds of situations and what materials go with different building structures. And that's the same in terms of developing relationships and being able to help someone who might need a caring hand. The 4th word was talk. And I think that so often we're running and we're emailing and we're checking our phones and we forget to really talk to each other. And that's key. And I think that Mates in Construction has really done a very, very excellent job of setting a foundation. There are a couple of numbers. I got the 72,000 off of the website. So Dr. Martin, your numbers were different than mine, and I don't know what the 72,000 in comparison to yours are, but I'd like to talk with you about that, because I'd like to have it right. And this is the structure. It's really about figuring out what the roles are and who wants to become trained in what, and looking at leadership and saying, where do we need those support and resources? I'm just going to kind of speed through this because I see that I'm starting to run out of time. Going back to suicide is everyone's business, and you can make a difference, and you matter. And those of us that are helpers can also be at risk. It's important to remember that. It's important to be able to reach out to friends and colleagues. It's also important to remember that we might be having a bad day, but someone sitting next to us might also be having a bad day and be experiencing that differently and might need us to reach out and put our things aside for a moment. I think it's important to remember that to have confidence and to believe that you can make a difference. Hope is everything. If you don't believe that you can make a difference, you won't feel confident in reaching out and in helping. The empathy is important. We can't teach empathy. That has to come from our inner self. But we can teach skills and we can teach knowledge. This picture I thought was very interesting. My husband was helping me look for images, and he found this one. And then a colleague indicated to me that that's a construction piece. And I thought, I didn't see that. I saw the life coming out of the concrete, but I hadn't made the analogy. And I thought, that's brilliant. Cement is foundation. And imagine if there was 200 little green pieces of life coming out that could save another life. And I really hope that if you don't feel confident about reaching out, that you'll reach out to me or you'll reach out to Jorgen or to John and say, how can I get trained? How can I help? Because that's what we really want from this room. Thank you.
Thanks, Heather. It's sometimes it's good to go, so we have this worldwide perspective. What does it look like on the ground with ordinary people? And I always think, I told Susan this story last night. We were Steve Jackson, who's our case manager field officer in Townsville, and myself were at a place called Cloncurry. Who's been to Cloncurry? Yeah, it's a great place. Long way away. So we were training there, construction workers, and I remember this one beast of a man. He was a grader driver. And we did the training, finished Friday afternoon, and we scooted off to Mount Isa to fly out of the space, and he drove back to Winton. And Monday morning I get a phone call. John, got a notch on me belt. I said, what? He says, I got a notch on me belt, I've saved one. I said, we only trained you Friday. I said, what have you been doing? He says, well, I always have a beer in the Winton Club on a Friday night, so I went in there with the guy I normally have a beer with, and he says, what have you been doing? He says, I've been in Cloncurry, done 2 days of suicide intervention training. He says, that was interesting, how'd that go? He says, well, to be honest, the whole time I was thinking about you. He says, what do you mean? He says, well, you're doing this, 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 and this, and I reckon you're thinking about suicide, are you? He goes, shit, yes, how'd you know? He says, that was what the training's about, and we're not leaving here till we've got a plan to keep you safe and make certain that you don't do that, because I'm not drinking here by myself. And the follow-up to that was I was in Longreach last year, and I was walking down the street, and here's this guy, like he's unmissable, like he's a beast of a man, and he sees me just outside the Merino Bakery, which is another good spot in Longreach, by the way. And he goes, John! And I went over and I said, we had a bit of a chat, and I said, how's your mate going? He says, good as gold. He says, we just needed to get him over that hump, and now he's kicking goals. So you want to know what Live and Works training looks like? In the hands of an ordinary person? It's a powerful tool, isn't it? Powerful tool. So thank you, Heather, for that. That's what you do looks like for ordinary, everyday people. Right, Brenton. Story always grabs me because I know that bloke had a family. Ask Brenton, who's the key man in Australia in Living Works, and we've known Brenton in Mason Construction since almost the very beginning. So Brenton has got a presentation. He's coming up. So welcome, Brenton.
I'm actually going to go before Brenton.
That's good. There you go.
I would like for Jorgen and John to come up here, please. And John, please, both of you. Living Works would like to present a certificate of recognition to mates in construction for their gold standard of work and for a model that I think all of us should exemplify. So, thank you.
There's so much to build on what's already been said this morning. But I just wanted to briefly just say, I've known these guys now since 2007, and I had the privilege of seeing what they want to develop and grow. I got to know Jorgen and John pretty much within months of each other, and as they really began putting their thoughts and ideas together, and as you heard today about Jorgen being almost given an ultimatum, develop something, they certainly have. They certainly have developed something rather unique and amazing. And I wanted to just pick up on Dr. Graham Martin's comment that this is not just a program about trying to gain funding. It's actually about an organisation that cares about an industry and wants to make a difference in protecting lives against suicide. And those lives, their mission is about saving lives, and it's all based on building a foundation through relationships. And I think that is a testament to, as we say, 200 people sitting in this room. This is the work of two men building a team of people to build a relationship and with the industry and to serve alongside of it and to help protect those lives. So as they developed their programs, where they developed their first GAT, their first general awareness training they started writing it back in 2007. They then took on the life skills program in 2008, and then they delivered their first Safe Talk training on an Abbey Group site, which happened to have been David Jenkinson's site, and I happened to speak with him last night, and so that was really exciting to hear about that particular story. Since then, and quoting again from Dr. Graham's figures, they have now done 38,000 GATs, 2,800 connected trainings, that's the equivalent of the Safe Talk, 392 assists across 582 sites. I think that's a commendable effort. So, on behalf of Living Works, it is a pleasure and an honour to gift Jorgen and John with a symbolic token of the Living Works family, one of our stick figurines, in appreciation and thanks for the hard work that was quoted this morning as well, that each of them have dedicated to helping creating a suicide-safer community in the construction sector. Thank you.
If I can just say a few words, because I'm getting worried about this, because this is not Jorgen and John. This is an industry working together. It's a team within our organization working together. It is 4 states picking up on the idea and start developing, every one of us in our own way committed to suicide prevention and creating a suicide-safer community. So none of this is about Jorgen and John. Every bit of this is about having an industry that cares and an industry that's prepared to make a difference when we need to and stand up to the plate and start tackling a difficult issue. So I think that these kind of things, they don't actually go to us, but they actually go to the industry, and they should be shared amongst the people who are part of making a difference, because that's what we all hear about. So thank you very much.
This looks remarkably like one of the breadsticks at the Merino Bakery at Longreach. And yeah, I must admit, I'm a bit like Jorgen, I'm a bit embarrassed. Not embarrassed, we're proud of what Mates in Construction have done, but we're not the only people working in this space. You know, we've got people here from IncoLink who've been working in this space much longer than Mates in Construction and doing good work. We've got people here from AusHelp in Tasmania and Canberra who've been doing good work. People here from Super Friends who've been working away at it. Yeah, we've found a way of doing it in our own way, and it's gained a bit of momentum. But it's not just us. It's the industry that's going, we've got a problem and we're going to have some strategies and we've got to do something that works, because too many construction workers are taking their life, and their families and the grief that follows that is intergenerational. And that is intolerable. So these sort of things belong in the industry. They belong to those connectors and those assist people who stood up, to the field workers who are out there every day, to the case managers dealing with the complicated stuff, to people like CBUS who sponsor our events, and NFIA who are one of the very first sponsors that we had. That's where the credit belongs. Because suicide is everyone's business. Everyone's business. So what I want you to do is stand up. This is tied into that principle that the mind will only take in what the bum can endure. I want you to turn to the people on the table next to you and just shake their hand and say, thanks for being here, thanks for making a difference.